Well, today I am so grateful to be talking with Caitlin Salmon, also known as the Family History Gal. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. As we get started, would you mind just introducing yourselves, telling us about your background and how you got into family history?
Sure. So again, my name's Caitlin, and I am a stay-at-home mom, and I have three kids. We live in Washington State. And I have always had a passion for family history. I used to be a elementary school teacher, so I obviously didn't have much time for that, and that was my focus in school. But I did take some genealogy classes in college, and it's just been something that has always been something I've been working on. And there's a lot of research that we've been able to do in my family, especially on my dad's side. And just with his family dynamics, there was a lot of family members that we just didn't have access to or didn't know who they were. And so it's been really fun to put in the research to figure out who they were, what lives they lived, and, kind of honor and bring them into our lives, even though we didn't really have any interactions with them.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know you mentioned, I think it was on your website that you're all about like discovering new ways of connecting with your ancestors.
Yeah, that's
What
right.
what are some of the favorite ways that you've been able to do that? Like the creative things that have just come through your adventure with all this?
Sure. I think one of my favorite ways is in the kitchen. So I think that recipes are a fabulous way to honor your ancestors and share them with your family because food's so universal. Everyone loves to eat, and most people actually enjoy the process of making food, and especially kids. And it's such an easy way to invite them into the kitchen with you as you're making something and talk about that ancestor or your own memories with that recipe that you're making. Other ways that uh, I did this year was we made like a little tree of ancestors at Christmas time that we put next to our other tree so that our kids could see their names and faces. And another thing that I love to do is to just read about them, read their memoirs, and tell my kids about those stories and stuff like that. And finally, a different thing is I love to find out what their favorite music was. I think music is also another really, universal thing that
Mhm.
people love music. And something I've been working on is just making like a playlist, ancestor playlist of like my grandma's favorite songs, my grandpa's favorite songs, my parents, myself, siblings, and listening to them in the car. And this is grandpa's favorite song or great grandpa's favorite song, and that's fun for my kids too.
That is so fun. It's very, very interactive for everyone in the family.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's
So
so
yeah.
cool. Um, so one of the reasons I found you on Instagram or wanted to visit with you is because of some recent posts that you've made relating to that journey that you've been on,
Hmm.
discovering your ancestors, and some of the more challenging parts of that, talking about our heart and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, Without going into too much detail, but as much as you feel comfortable, what has that journey been like for you, and where has that led you?
Well, and this will really go to my dad's side, and I think both my parents' side. Ancestors are complicated. There's always going to be
Mhm.
ancestors where you're like, oh wow, that wasn't a great decision, or I
Yep.
can't believe that person did that. But especially with my dad's side, I never met my biological grandfather, and I he was never a part of my dad's life, so he didn't have his real dad a part of his life, and he was never part of our lives, and so consequently, a lot of that family history wasn't passed down in a way that is usually passed down through like family stories and our interactions with that person. And so, just kind of having to navigate that, I think for me and my siblings, recognizing that there's this supposedly important figure in our life that's just not there.
Totally.
And we did have my grandmother remarried, and we did have a wonderful grandpa. He wasn't our biological grandpa, and he did fill in those shoes in every way possible and did an amazing job. But there's still that, wow,
Mm.
this guy never wanted to even know us or be part of our lives or even be a part of my father's life, and that's his own child. And that's painful, in its own way. And
Yep.
even though it's not something that we really miss, because we did have someone fill that spot, I recognize that people don't always have people fill in the gaps in terms of ancestors like that. So that's where it started. I had been doing more research about him. He was a huge basketball player. There's tons of articles about him from high school and college, and I just kind of took a deep dive into learning more about him, and it just kind of hurt in the process too, because there was so much about this man that I didn't know, and I wish I would have known. And it's kind of hard to uncover the truth and do it through newspapers. I would have rather just had someone tell me about it, like him,
Yeah.
and had him in our lives.
Yeah, totally. I think for many people, there's so many different types of experiences that our ancestors went through, whether it's a divorce, whether it's leaving a family, not being part, choosing to leave a marriage, or trauma or abuse, or there's so many different things that we inherit as their posterity, and it is hard to deal with. I've
Right.
been processing some of those things myself over the past years as I've done my family history. Um, and it's yeah, it's not fun, it's not easy, and
No.
it shows the reality, I think, that you've highlighted, that we're imperfect people and we descend from imperfect people.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that? You've shared about that before.
Yeah, I recently found this quote. I was writing up something for someone, and it just talked about how we were the result, or the fabric. It's by Belinda Jeffrey. We are the fabric of mistakes and hurts, a family tree of fumbled attempts, successes, and failures. And I think a lot of times when people talk about their family history, it's like this glowing report of, well, this person was amazing and did this, and this person was amazing and did this. And we tend to kind of gloss over that these people were human and that there might have been aspects about them that were less favorable. And we don't often share those things. And I think it's really important to try and give a bigger picture than, just what we want to share with people. And especially for like our own posterity, because if we just kind of hold up this mantle or this, you have to reach this high to be like this person, it's a lot of pressure on kids, and they need to know that they descend from imperfection because they're going to make mistakes. And that's something that's really important to me, is to share all those stories so that we realize that we're not trying to be perfect like someone else, because they weren't perfect either.
Definitely. Have you, as you've been going through this journey, have you had the chance to share this with your children? And how have they responded to it?
So my kids are 7, 5, and 1, and so they're
Mhm.
still kind of little for me to, um, you know, I guess I just haven't really been able to find the moment to tell them about this specific thing.
Mhm.
But the thing that's been really powerful is to talk to some of my siblings and to have those conversations about, especially my grandfather. And, we've kind of only known the hard things our whole lives, and to be able to go back and talk about his accomplishments and the things that he was able to do, and hopefully for my siblings paint a more rounded picture that, just he wasn't just all bad. He was a star athlete and he overcame a lot of things, and I was able to find out a lot of that information. And I think that's been powerful for at least me and my siblings, who've kind of been the most affected for it from it. And I think, like, as time goes on and my kids get a little bit older, that's definitely something I will share with them,
Yep.
especially as they navigate different circumstances. I can kind of refer back to these stories, and um, you know, there's lots of things I can use from my ancestors.
Yeah, totally. How has as you've gone through exploring, learning, researching about these ancestors that have had difficult pasts and left, um, maybe not the the crystal stain, the untarnished legacy that we hope to receive. How has your relationship with that individual changed, even though they are deceased?
Um, I'll share a different ancestor. I have a great grandfather, and it's just sad. He went to jail at one point, made some really poor decisions, and I'm just not sure what kind of father he was either. And I had heard those stories growing up, but I also, in my own research, discovered his immigration story and discovered, generations and generations that went on before him, and just kind of recognizing the struggle of an immigrant and how hard that was kind of gave me more empathy for him, even though he did make some poor choices and, maybe wasn't the dad he should have been. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in a different country completely alone
Mm.
and in a completely new culture. And so as I found out more about my ancestors and painted a more well-rounded picture of them, especially the ones who I may have had negative feelings towards, I've gained empathy and understanding, and that's really healing, especially if you've been personally, you know, impacted by some of these decisions that your ancestors have made.
Yeah, I think the more we learn about someone and their context and where they're from and everything, it just, yeah, it does paint that bigger picture, because we're not just a name on a pedigree chart.
Right,
We're not just a profile on social media. Like, there's like way more to us, and we're so multifaceted as human beings. And that learning more about that can really shape how we, yeah, how we view our ancestors, but also ourselves, I think, as well.
right. Yeah, a lot of what I've been reading some studies about family history and the impacts that it can have on, like, especially younger generations. And just knowing the stories of our ancestors can be a huge boost for our kids and ourselves of just recognizing who we are. And as we kind of navigate those stories of our ancestors, we can say, yeah, that's not something I would do. I would do it this way. And you're able to kind of figure out who you are in that process. And so that's why I think it's so valuable to tell all the stories and to be willing to share them with your kids, even if they're hard to share.
Yeah, completely agreed. I really like those that body of research as well that talk about
Mhm.
family narratives, um, and the more that we know, that increases resiliency and decreased anxiety and things like that, and just helps kind of give clues to stronger threads of health, of stability in an individual, in a child's life.
Right. Totally.
um, I know we've talked a lot about the painful and the challenging, and talking about that, and kind of flipping that around. Has there any times when you've found health or like healing and strength, as you've learned about your ancestors?
Yeah, I think lots of healing and strength. I mean, I feel like I could share so many examples of that. Um, One that comes to mind that I've been working on recently. So this is my great great grandmother's family, and this is the great grandmother of, or the grandmother of my grandfather. And so we didn't really know anything about them at all.
Hmm.
And my dad maybe had some interactions with that side of the family, but really didn't have much. And I have been spending a lot of time learning about this family, and I have found they came from a really small town near Escondido, California, and by what was called Lake Wolford. And they this little town had a newspaper, and they would write everything about what was going on in town. I
Yep.
love when you can find a small town like that because it's such a great genealogy tool,
Mhm.
to just look at the newspapers. And I was able to find hundreds of articles about this family and just painted a picture of all their lives and when they got married, who they were visiting for the weekend, just even small things like that. Some of the more traumatic things that they went through in their lives too. And as I found more out about this family, I felt like, even though I was sad that I didn't know my grandfather and I didn't have, the opportunities to hear these stories myself from, a better source than a newspaper. I was so grateful that those stories existed
Mhm.
still and that they weren't lost because of that fragment in my family. And so that provided some healing because I was just so grateful to have those stories. And um and again that they weren't lost to time because really you're not always guaranteed to have resources and information like that when you're doing a family history project, and to have that was such a gift and so healing because it stood the test of time even though we didn't have a relationship really with this side of the family.
Definitely. You talked about time, and I've heard the saying that time heals all wounds, and I've also heard the opposite.
Right.
What's your experience with that?
um I think that it's probably much easier for me to heal my wounds with this situation than maybe like someone closer to it. Like I I can't imagine growing up without a dad, that.
Mhm.
And so I often wonder like how hard that was for my father. Um and so sometimes I think that generations heal, as generations move on, as we're kind of less and less directly impacted by the choices of other people, that we are able to maybe take that step back and paint a different picture of this individual. So I do think it might be a generation thing. If someone is directly impacted by something that's truly awful, they might never be able to, really come to find a place of honor for that person. Whereas
Mhm.
maybe in a different generation, more detached from that pain, is able to, spend that time and resources to paint that picture. And that's okay. Like I think that that should be accepted. And if there's something that's truly painful in someone's life, don't bring that pain in if you're not ready. And so it could be time, could be generations, but you're right. Time could also be our enemy with that too.
Yeah.
As you think about something and it builds up inside you. But
Mhm.
that's at least my experiences. I think that as generations have gone on, that maybe our gift is that we can actually, you know, process the situation better.
I love that, the healing throughout generations.
Right.
Um, Trying to remember my question I was gonna ask. Um, there's so many thoughts. Um, let's see. Being in the healthcare profession, I was curious if you've had any experience talking about difficult medical topics, or if
Mhm.
there's top things about family members having cancer or other diseases and how that's affected you, and kind of in the same context of family history, but looking at it in the lens of like diseases and illness and things like that.
Yeah, totally. I saw that question, and the person I thought of immediately was my maternal grandmother. And I was probably 12 or 13 when she got the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And she's the one who I'm named after and was always just the most lovely creature ever to walk the earth, just the
Mhm.
best grandma. And I clearly remember the trip where she got that diagnosis and I was at my aunt's house and just like feeling the weight of that and not really knowing as a 12-year-old like what was going to happen. And for those of people who haven't experienced Alzheimer's, it's sometimes a really long and drawn out disease. And it's, you know, I it I was just how old was I when she passed away? I was probably like 30, so from being 12 to or 13 to 30, like that's a long time to know a diagnosis and to watch someone go through that process of that disease. And from a family history perspective, you want, especially with that disease, to preserve whatever you can from her. And um and that can be challenging, especially when someone's forgetting things or confused. And it was just a hard thing to watch. And it was hard to see yourself being forgotten in the eyes of someone that loves you, and even more difficult for my mother, who watched her mother, just not really be there anymore. Um, and my mom's been really good about writing her own memoirs of her mother and just cherishing everything that her mother taught her and instilled in her. And I guess that's a big takeaway for me, that even though we had this devastating diagnosis, that you can let those things kind of cripple you, or you can start moving and do what you can to make the most of that situation, especially with preserving information and things for future generations.
Totally. My grandfather had a form of dementia. I think maybe perhaps about Alzheimer's, and maybe another factor in type of dementia. But as I saw him go through a similar experience, it was hard, because
Yeah.
he was kind of the patriarch of family history in my mom's family, and it was hard to see him fade, and to have his memory of these people and events in his life kind of diminish over time, and to the
Right.
point that he wasn't able to have much of a conversation at all, even though he's done family history and genealogy like his whole life.
Right.
So I definitely can relate with that, and how challenging it is. But yet I love what you said, that we can also use that opportunity to preserve what memories we can,
Right.
and to document those things.
Right. Yeah, and that my mom's been really good at, like I said, she wrote that memoir about her mother, but she's also been really good at making these little shadow boxes of like mementos, and just passing on things to us, like this was this person's. And she's just been really careful about labeling everything. Um and I don't know if Alzheimer's is something that can be inherited generally, like to lower other generations. But if it is, that's something that I should probably be aware of and
Mhm.
maybe should start labeling my stuff. Um, but yeah, she definitely, and I think it's been a form of therapy for her too, to process everything and writing her thoughts. She's a big journal writer, and it's been therapeutic for her. And I think that family history can be therapeutic in a lot of ways, and especially in this kind of circumstance, or dealing with complicated ancestors, just learning about them or preserving them in some way. I do think it's very therapeutic and good for our souls.
I love it. Not only doing family history, but doing family history, and also the process of recording our own history, of
Right.
journaling and talking to other people and other things. It is, yeah, very therapeutic. I love
Yeah,
that.
it really is. So more people need to get into it.
Totally.
But,
Is there any, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
um, I think the one thing that I would like to share the most, and this is what I've been really um, focusing on the past couple weeks, especially as I kind of deep dived into my grandfather's life, that there's the story in the Bible where the woman is caught in adultery and she's brought to Jesus. And I hope that's okay that I'm sharing the story.
Totally.
But I we can either be the ones who pick up a stone ourselves and join the people who wanted to stone her, or we could approach it more like Jesus. And I think of that with our ancestors. If your ancestor was kneeling before you, with all the people who had a problem with that person, would you join them with your stone, or would you extend mercy to that person and that ancestor? And I think that when you do family history, hopefully, if you do, or you're burdened by stones that you have against people who have hurt you, hopefully the process will allow you to kind of, you know, be able to give away that weight that you've been carrying around. Hopefully, seeing a more well-rounded picture of an individual, or at least finding one good thing about that individual's life, can bring some sort of lift to you. I really truly believe that we're not here to judge our ancestors for what they did. We simply do not know what their lives were like. We can learn from them, and it's okay to feel pain from them, but I really do believe that we're not here to judge them in any way, and to, you know, pass on stories that are overly critical. I think that there's definitely a balance in your storytelling of your ancestors. And so I just hope that people are able to find ways to honor them, and to do it in a way that's healing for themselves as well.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
If any,
welcome.
if anyone wanted to get in touch with you or find you on social media, where and how could they do that?
So I have an Instagram called Family History Gal, and also have a website, familyhistorygal.com. And I post regularly, and just my thoughts about family history, ways to connect with your ancestors, and tips and all sorts of stuff related to family history.
And they are amazing tips and thoughts, and
So
I
thank
appreciate
you so
seeing them
much.
in my inbox. So thank you for
Oh,
sharing,
yeah,
and
no problem.
thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yep.